Alrighty, that brings us to 2 p.m. Central. So again, thank you everybody for joining me. It looks like we still have a couple of people just filing in here, but no worries. So today we're going to be covering a pretty interesting topic. Actually, we're going to be chatting about spongy moth, but specifically how it relates to the state of California. As recently as last year, we have found a few instances of spongy moth captured in traps in the state of California, and we're going to go over that data later on in the presentation. So I think it is an important conversation to have, and it's an important conversation to carry regarding spongy moth, its biology, potential hosts, as well as any management strategies that we have available to us. So we'll hop right in just with a few housekeeping slides. You will notice that the chat is actually disabled. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and I'll be able to answer them at the end of the conversation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording about 2 days after the webinar, and it will also be posted on our YouTube page as well. This webinar is worth 1 ISA CEU for the live broadcast. After the webinar, Rainbow will submit your name and certification on your behalf. So there's nothing that you have to do on your side. We will submit your information. If you didn't enter your ISA certification number during registration, you were asked to, but if you didn't, that's okay. Just go ahead and pop your name and your ISA certification number in the chat, and we'll make sure that you're accounted for. So hopping right into today's presentation. Again, we're going to chat about spongy moth, specifically in California. And we're going to go through its biology, its hosts, so potential impacts within the landscape, and then finally some management strategies that we have available to us. So my name is Kendra Wagner. I'm a research scientist with Rainbow Ecoscience. Essentially what I do is I run research trials really across the country. I also present at a lot of conferences and really love just connecting with folks such as yourself, seeing and learning about the issues and management challenges that you're having in the landscape, and then trying to find the best new products and protocols that we can offer you guys. So today, this is a little bit of a roadmap for today's talk. Welcome and introductions and learning objectives. We're going to take a step back and cover over on some very basic level introduction to insects. We're going to talk about major insect orders, really basic level stuff, because I think it's important that we kind of bring it back to basics, especially when we're talking about some of these invasive pests. Then we're going to dive into spongy moth's biology and impacts, ways that we can manage spongy moth, and then hopefully have some time to review and answer some questions at the end. So introduction to insects. My background is in forestry, but also forest entomology. And so whenever I get the opportunity to talk about insects, especially ones that are as damaging and invasive as spongy moth, I really like to take the opportunity, go back to basics, and really introduce people to the world of insects and really what we're talking about. I think it can help support some of these ideas that we have and really increase our understanding of the pest, of its biology, and then also how we can better manage it as well. First and foremost, insects are the largest phylum in the animal kingdom. They also, the phylum Arthropoda includes lobsters, crabs, spiders, mites, insects, centipedes, and millipedes. And 84% of all known species of animals are members of this phylum, phylum being this group that we kind of bundle all of these creatures in together. Talking about insects specifically, I think we focus on a lot of the bad stuff with insects. As landscape managers, we're typically trying to manage these invasive and damaging pests. And so I always like to slip in a couple of slides on the good stuff and the good things that insects offer us. So wood-boring insects are actually vital to the decomposition of wood. Why is that important in the urban environment? Well, if you're doing it properly and hopefully you're encouraging clients to apply mulch to their trees, doing mulch donuts, not mulch volcanoes. And the breakdown and decomposition of that wood adds organic matter to the soil. And in order for that to occur, wood-boring insects are just vital to this process. Insects are also a vital source to many animal species that we see in our urban environment and just contribute to the whole ecosystem that we see. They also introduce oxygen as well as fungi, to actually speed decomposition. So most insects have what's called a mycangia, which is a specialized organ just kind of under their neck right here. And it can hold different types of fungi that can assist them in this decomposition process and is actually vital to the success of many of these insects as well, and their ability to actually be successful and feed in our landscape and in our plants. A couple of quick facts. Wood-boring insects are amongst the most destructive pests in ornamental trees and shrubs. And this is something we hear a lot about: emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, any type of jewel beetle. These types of wood-boring insects can be incredibly disruptive, especially to ornamental trees and shrubs. They feed within the xylem of the tree or of the plant and can actually completely disrupt that nutrient translocation system, and can cause further decline and sometimes even death in some of these plants. Most wood-boring insects are actually the larvae of beetles and moths, and they usually, generally speaking, are the most damaging life stage. So we see, especially with beetles, the larvae life stages of these beetles burrow through that wood. They're the ones that we're really looking to manage, and can cause the most damage. Finally, clearwing and flat-headed borers are some of the other main types of insects that we're going to see on woody ornamentals. Again, before kind of hopping right into the pests that we're going to talk about today, I always like to take a minute and make these two distinctions, okay? We hear a lot of times comments of a pest being native or non-native, being invasive, exotic, and I think sometimes we get these terms confused. So I like to take a moment and just cover off on them really briefly before we dive in and talk about the pests that we're going to talk about today. The first one being, and the first distinction being, native insects. When we say an insect is native or native to North America, it means that as far back as we know, we can see that this insect pest or this insect has co-evolved with North American tree species. So our North American tree species have these natural co-evolved self-defense mechanisms that they can employ when they're attacked by these native insects. Conversely, insects that are non-native, we can also say that they're exotic. That means they're non-native to North America. They came from somewhere else. So they evolved with other plant species, other flora and fauna. They were likely imported via solid wood packaging material. They've been able to establish a population here, and they're now attacking our native vegetation here in North America. Now, it's important to remember that we do have native species of insects that can also be invasive. Now, whenever an insect population or an insect species, for whatever reason, whether it be it's introduced to a naive host range or because of shifting climates, as soon as that insect is able to reach those kind of outbreak population levels, that's when we can then consider it a invasive insect, even if it's native. So again, I just wanted to get those terms down. I feel like we use them interchangeably a lot. So I love to bring up this figure here. Now, this is the disease decline spiral, and this was published back in 1991. And the reason why I like to bring it up is because it has one of the major pests that we're going to be talking about today. Spongy moth falls into the classification of a defoliating insect, meaning that it defoliates the plants that it feeds on. And then we also see wood and bark boring insects present as well. Now, it's important to look at this figure, although it does look like something off Dr. Seuss. It's important for us to see, hey, both defoliating and wood and bark boring insects are major factors that we have to that are contributing to the decline of urban plants. How do insects impact our plants in an urban environment? They can remove sap, which can rob plants of photosynthate. They can feed on cell contents, disrupting plant and cell function. They can consume leaf tissue, which can remove the capacity for this plant to produce energy through photosynthesis. They can consume vascular tissue. So those are our phloem boring insects. And that can actually disrupt that transportation of nutrients throughout the plant. And then finally, some of these insects can actually vector pathogens, which can further actually cause disease and decline within these attacked plants. Insects generally fall into 4 different feeding guilds: piercing and sucking, leaf chewing, which is spongy moth, is what we're going to talk about today, stem and twig boring, and then leaf mining. And all insects have a number of different things in common, one of them being that they have an exoskeleton present. So they don't have a skeleton on the inside like you or I. They have kind of this hard shell that holds everything together. They have bilateral symmetry. So if I were to take this insect and cut it directly down the middle, everything on the right should appear as it is on the left, obviously barring any other damages to the insect. But for the most part, bilateral symmetry in these insects. We also see what we call specialized appendages. Specialized appendages are appendages that these insects have that are specialized for the environment that they should live in. If you see a mole cricket, you can tell that mole cricket should be surviving or living in the earth because it has these specialized appendages to allow it to do so. We also see that insects have segmented bodies. They have a head, thorax, and an abdomen. And then finally, jointed appendages, just like you or I. They're allowed to move their legs because they have this jointed compound in there. Now, insects breathe differently than you or I, and this can come into play depending on what type of insecticide or product that we're using. It's important to understand this. So insects don't have lungs like you or I, where you or I breathe in, the oxygen goes into our lungs, we're able to oxygenate our blood, which surrounds our body and is able to go where we need it. Now, insects work a little bit differently. Now, they actually have these spiracles down the side, and I'll show you a photo of that in just 1 second. You can actually see them with your naked eye. And then from there, the air is essentially pulled into these tiny little air sacs, which are found throughout the length of the abdomen. And then it's able to be moved around and utilized from there. Now, again, these spiracles, you can see them with your naked eye on especially soft-bodied insects. So the next time you have a soft-bodied caterpillar, a large caterpillar, you can see them with the naked eye, or you can use a hand lens to zoom in and see these sort of slit-like markings down both sides of these insects. And those are essentially the air pathways. Again, this comes into play with some of the active ingredients we might decide to use when managing some of these pests. Now, we talked about insects having specialized appendages, and that is really obvious in the legs. I use the example of the mole cricket because I think it is the most dramatic that we see. That's the digging leg you see in the top left. Now, we also see that insects, traditionally insects that are surviving in areas like grass or crop fields, they have these large jumping legs, and they're allowed to use those just as a spring. We see those a lot with grasshoppers, allows them to jump over foliage or jump over grass that they need to jump over. And then we also see predatory leg. These are typically found in insects that are consuming other insects. So things like mantids that want to grab onto their prey and pull them in. You have that predatory type leg. And then also a swimming leg. Now, this is obviously for insects that are aquatic, that are able to live the majority of their life underwater. And it allows them to use it just like a paddle so that they can actually swim a lot better. And insects, just like humans, have femur, tibia, and tarsi. So they're actually quite similar to you and I. Just like their legs, we see specialized appendages in their mouth parts as well. And by understanding how insects feed, it can better allow us to classify these insects, understand what family of insects or what order of insects we're looking at. And it can also help us to better understand our treatment options. So the first one being a chewing type insect. Now, these are insects that have very large mandibles out front. They're very obvious. You also have a labrum and then your compound eye and your antenna. We have insects like butterflies that have a sucking proboscis. So that just is like a tube and it just kind of curls up underneath and they're able to unfurl that and stick that into a flower or whatever they're going after in order to get their food source. Next, we have something called a piercing sucking mouthpart. And as the name suggests, this allows the insect to pierce their mouthpart into the plant tissue and actually suck up all of those plant juices. And this can actually steal a lot of the nutrients and a lot of all that good stuff from the plant. And we can see damages from this over time. And then finally, commonly found in bees, we see something like a chewing, lapping combination of a mouth part, and not common in landscape pests. So I want to take a moment before diving in to go over insect orders. There are approximately 30 different insect orders. The majority of them fall into only about 8, and only a few of these are really important to landscape managers. Now, the insect orders that we are going to deal with most as landscape managers include Coleoptera, which are our beetles, Hymenoptera, which is our bees, ants, and wasps. We call these guys wasp-waisted because they come to a wasp waist, just like we're used to. We see Lepidoptera, and as that beautiful name suggests, these are the moths and butterflies, what we're going to chat about today. And then finally, Hemiptera. These are our aphid scales, and then what we also call true bugs. Now, we're going to dive a little bit more in detail on butterflies and moths. This is the pest that we're talking about today. Now, butterflies and moths as a whole undergo complete metamorphosis, meaning the egg form and the larval form of this insect is significantly different than the adult form of this insect. It looks very different and it even acts very different. Now, the adults of these insects have scaled wings, so they look very soft and velvety. If you've ever touched the wing of a butterfly, it comes off as almost like dust on your hands. And those are tiny microscopic scales. If you were to cover those over with like a scanning electron microscope, it almost looks like shingles on your roof. They're slightly overlapping little scales that completely cover the entirety of the wing. And then finally, these insects in their adult form have that proboscis, so that curled up mouth part that they can uncurl to feed as adults. Now, butterflies and moths are just an extravagant group of animals, and it's something that we see from really around the world. We see mimics, so the bottom left, you can see snake mimics, sometimes other amphibian mimics. We can see differences in patterns depending on where these insects are found or what they feed on. And they're really just a beautiful, one of the most stunning groups of insects, in my opinion. Unfortunately, though, as landscape managers in North America, we're a little bit more used to seeing these insects in this form. Okay, we're used to seeing them as bagworms or tent caterpillars. Sometimes their hairs can actually cause irritation to human skin. We see them folding up and chewing on the landscape plants that we're trying to manage. So although they are beautiful in their adult form, sometimes we are a little bit more used to managing ones that look like this. So this is just an overly simplified life cycle of a moth or a butterfly. So it starts out in the egg form, as you can see in the bottom left. Now these eggs are so tiny, incredibly microscopic. The larvae then hatch out of these eggs. The first thing they do usually is turn around and consume the egg casing itself, and then they start feeding on whatever foliage they happen to be laying on. Sometimes, and we'll talk about this with spongy moths specifically, but with really invasive or high populated areas of certain moth or lepidopteran species, they can also be laid or have egg masses that look a little bit different than this, but you'll find them on things like cars, vehicles, patio sets, and then they'll hatch from that and actually just move to whatever the closest vegetation is to start feeding there. Then we see the larval stage, so the caterpillar. This is something that we're very used to seeing and very familiar with. They then pupate within their chrysalis and then emerge as a beautiful butterfly or moth. Now, butterflies and moths are really important in our landscape. Okay, they're key pollinators, they're herbivores, which just contribute to kind of the whole world that we see around us. But unfortunately, some are pests. Okay, and you might be familiar with some of these in the forms of pests. Okay, they can defoliate our plants, they can be a nuisance. Again, sometimes they can cause irritation. Their hairs can cause irritation on our skin, and they can be really impactful on the overall vigor and health of the landscape that we see. So diving into today's topic, spongy moth, or Lymantria dispar, is the scientific name for this specific pest. Now, this pest, you heard me slip up earlier. It was formerly called gypsy moth, and it was reclassified and renamed spongy moth because of its spongy egg masses. And we'll see a few photos of that here in just one second. Now, this pest is native to Europe and Asia, and it was introduced. I'll talk a little bit more about how it was introduced in just one moment. But in this photo we see here, we see the flightless female on the left, and then the smaller male on the right. Now, again, spongy moth is a foliar feeding pest. So it's going to eat and consume all of the foliage off the plants that it is attacking. Now, this pest specifically is a generalist feeder, okay? It's a generalist, as general as it comes. These guys can feed on over 300 species of plants that we have in our landscapes. They really like hardwoods. They love oak, they love birch, and they love aspen. Now, this is a wonderful figure that I found off of, I believe it was Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority. And this, the timing of this is going to change based on your location and climate that you're in, but generally it'll follow this if you're anywhere sort of in these northern states. We see egg masses start to appear around August or May, and you'll see photos of the egg masses in just one second, but they're pretty telltale that they are spongy moth egg masses. We then see the caterpillars start to emerge around May or July, or at least that's when you'll really notice them. We see pupas start to form around June or July, and then finally the moths will begin to emerge in May, around July and August. Again, this will change depending on where you are located and climate and location and all that good stuff, but this gives you sort of a general idea of their life cycle and timing. Now, the egg masses, as I said, you have to have a special eye for them. Once you start seeing them, you're going to see them everywhere. So the female, as I said, is flightless. This is what you see in the left photo here. Now, she lays her eggs on the bark, usually on the bark of trees, and then she will use the fuzzy coating from her belly, from her abdomen, to actually cover over on those eggs. And that's what we see in this sort of felt-like substance here. Now, again, the female is flightless. She is only able to walk around on the tree, and she uses mating pheromones to actually draw in her male counterpart. Now, as I said, the egg masses are tan colored. They're spongy. They're usually laid on attacked trees, but in areas of higher populations, you'll also see them on bark, rocks, vehicles, anywhere that they can lay these eggs, they will. Now, the spongy moth egg masses are sort of this rusty pale brown color. They're usually about oval in shape. And again, they're covered in those hairs from that female's belly or abdomen. A single egg mass can contain anywhere from 500 to 1,000 eggs, and one single female can lay up to 100 egg masses, which is pretty incredible to think about. The moths will lay them pretty much just about anywhere. I've seen them on tires, as well as house siding as well. Now, this is a closer up photo of the larvae and what we're going to be looking for. And there are a couple of different distinguishing features that we need to look for when we're identifying spongy moth larvae. Now, this is, again, the destructive stage of spongy moth. The adults don't do damage. You're going to see the most defoliation and the most damage in the larval stage of spongy moth. Spongy moth caterpillars have a sort of blue-black hairy body. They have 5 pairs of blue dots down their back, followed by 6 pairs of red dots on their back. When they first hatch from their eggs, their caterpillars are actually only about 0.25 inches in length, and they grow to be 1.5 to 2 inches long. Now, we have a number of different larvae, butterfly and moth larvae, in our environment that are very, very similar and can look very similar to spongy moth. These are just a few that I was able to pick out. These include the morning cloak butterfly, fall webworm, tent caterpillar, as well as the marsh dagger moth. So you can see they have a similar hair pattern. They do have that similar dot pattern, some similarities in colors as well. So it's important that we understand how to identify spongy moth larvae and how to differentiate those from potential other moths and butterflies in our environment. After the larval stage and several instars, they will pupate. So these pupation cases that we see here, usually you will see kind of the fuzz surrounding them. That's just from their larval stage. They're a dark brown color, almost bronze, and they're completely immobile. So once they pupate or once they're in pupation, they don't move around. If you hold one in your hand, sometimes they will wiggle a little bit, but they don't have legs. They can't move around from there. They're usually attached to something just with a little bit of webbing. Usually this is found in midsummer, and you'll see this on things like trees, the bark of trees, stones, and you'll see it, as I said, usually with these silk strands surrounding them. These pupae are typically 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches in length. And then finally, the adult stage. Again, the females are flightless and the males fly to locate females via these mating pheromones. And this is just a great photo of them spread open. You can see both the color differences, but also that very distinct size difference between both the male and the female spongy moth. Now, these guys can move around in a number of different ways. A lot of the larvae will actually do what's called ballooning, where they'll send out a piece of silk and actually get carried away on wind currents that way. But we also see human-mediated jump dispersal actually quite frequently with spongy moth, and we believe that's how it showed up in California. But human-mediated jump dispersal, just meaning in high enough populations or areas with high populations, they will move away from the tree, actually pupate and lay their eggs on other things, things being cars, things being trains, things that move around the country. And unfortunately, what happens is these egg masses are then easily moved from one location to another. Then they're able to be introduced and hopefully trapped and monitored in new areas. So spongy moth in the US has actually quite the history. So spongy moth was actually introduced by an entomologist in 1869 in Massachusetts, actually. Now, this French entomologist was actually interested in breeding spongy moth to hopefully come out with a hardier silkworm. So to increase and boost really the silk industry. Unfortunately, though, some of these moths escaped and actually were able to establish a population, and actually soon after that reached outbreak populations and caused significant tree damage and defoliation in the area. Since 1869, when it was first established, it spread through much of the Northeast and Midwest and even through parts of Canada. And then now we've actually detected it also in California. Now, how do these guys specifically impact the landscape, and why are we so concerned about them? Spongy moth in the US is capable of defoliating millions of acres annually. And with that, not only are we seeing a decrease, reduced growth or stress on these attacked trees, we're also seeing this reduced photosynthetic ability and vigor. But finally, we're seeing this really interesting change in forest composition that can occur when these forested areas are defoliated. We're changing the amount of light that's able to actually come through and hit the forest floor. And we can actually have severe impacts on the overall forest composition of that area. It's a great example of what can happen when spongy moth kind of really takes hold in certain trees. Now, these guys are actually powerful enough to chew right through the veins of the leaves, leaving just sort of the major ones there, as you can see. But they can completely defoliate an oak in less than a year. A really great map that actually shows us the establishment suitability across the continental US. So what this is showing us is not the probability or the likelihood that spongy moth is able to actually, establish a population. What this is showing us is areas within the country that spongy moth could potentially establish, whether that be the climate is conducive, the major forest cover is conducive, and so this takes into consideration a number of different things. So as we can see in black, we have unsuitable climate. So these are areas that spongy moth is not going to be very successful, might be introduced, but less likely to have an established population and cause a lot of damage there. This is mostly because, as I said, of climate. We can see areas like South Florida likely just too warm for spongy moth, and areas like South Texas. Next, we see urban deciduous tree canopy. Now, these are the areas on the map that are really in fluorescent bright green. These are areas throughout the country that both a major urban environment exists and that the overstory has deciduous trees in it. Again, these deciduous trees are what these spongy moth really go after, and it's what they prefer. In gray, we see that there is no preferred host present. This doesn't mean that the insect cannot be introduced or even establish a population. It's just that it's less likely to cause a lot of defoliation because the host is not there, the preferred host is not there. And then finally, in dark green, we see this preferred host present. And as we can see, that covers much of the US. So spongy moth in California. Spongy moth was introduced to California. We aren't really quite sure when. We do know that the California Department of Agriculture has these ongoing trapping efforts to monitor spongy moth. Between fall of 2023 and summer of 2024, the city of Calabasas in Los Angeles County found 16 moths trapped within their monitoring traps. What does this mean? This doesn't mean necessarily that there is an established population. To my knowledge, California has not made a statement on established populations present that are causing damage. This means that these moths were simply captured. So that means that they were introduced at some point. Again, we're not really quite sure when. They are present to some degree within the landscape, and they are being captured. So we can confirm their presence. Again, we don't know how long they were there. To my knowledge, California has not released a statement talking about their ongoing establishment or damage. But since we know that they're there, we have a piece of the puzzle that we have to be pretty cognizant of. So what do we know about spongy moths' ability to attack these Californian plants? We know that native and planted species in California are indeed hosts to spongy moths. So now we have the presence of the pest itself, and we also have susceptible hosts in the landscape. We see plants like Douglas fir and especially live oak. They do love their oak, commonly planted and present and established throughout the California landscape. And then finally, we see a lot of our urban planted species in California are susceptible to spongy moth. Tests on Western plants have shown that native and common California species, as I said, just like Douglas fir and live oaks, are common hosts to spongy moth. In addition, we see when ornamental trees that are commonly planted in California can be primary hosts, we have this additional layer of urban stress. So whenever we see a tree that is present in the urban environment and it's stressed, whether that be under drought stress, soil compaction, mechanical stress, or even stress from another pest, these trees are more susceptible to attack by a foliar feeding insect like spongy moth. So again, we have the climate suitability that we've just identified. We have the presence of the pest that, to our knowledge, that we've caught. And then finally, we do have the presence of a host, okay, both in the forest and urban planted landscapes throughout California. Now, as we know, spongy moth is not new to North America, okay? It's been around for a while. The Slow the Spread program, it's a great website. I really do encourage you to go on it. You can actually go on and see an interactive map from where you are and whether or not spongy moth has been found or if there's any current monitoring efforts. So I encourage you to check that out. But this program is dedicated to slowing the spread of spongy moth throughout the US. This Slow the Spread program is part of USDA's IPM program, and it's really a national strategy for spongy moth management. And interestingly enough, this Slow the Spread program is one of the world's largest and most successful integrated pest management programs, which is actually really exciting. So again, these guys are focused on a number of different things. They focus on things like suppressing outbreaks in infested areas. It's really a four-pronged approach. So suppressing outbreaks in infested areas, slowing the invasion front, eradicating new populations wherever they pop up, And then finally, regulating anthropogenic movements. So those are the movements via vehicles or trains that we talked about. Now, before we go into management options and discuss some of the management options that we can employ with Spongy Moth, it's really important to understand integrated pest management. I know there's some folks that are online right now that have heard this 100 times, but it's worth going over again and it's worth talking about. The first step to integrated pest management is the prevention of the pest. Now, we talk about right tree, right place, general plant health. We talked about how urban landscapes can sometimes be more susceptible to some of these foliar feeding insects because these trees are just more stressed in these urban landscapes. So going over proper practices, which we're going to do in just one second, to make sure that we're encouraging general plant health is really, really important, especially in the face of these newfound invasives, new populations in new areas. The next step of integrated pest management is detection. This includes things like population monitoring, so trapping, just like the state of California was doing, forecasting, so looking at like the map I showed you, climates. We want to look at host range, suitability, where these areas overlap. So things like forecasting, also using things like growing degree days to know when to monitor for the pest, when to look for the pest, and when the pest is going to be active. And then finally, warning systems. Before we even step into control, it's important to understand both prevention and detection and make sure that you, as well as your clients, are actually implementing some of these steps. Now we're going to talk about control. The first one being mechanical, physical, or natural control. With Spongy Moth, you can actually physically remove their egg masses, and I'll show you in just 1 minute a couple of different ways to do that. But the good thing with Spongy Moth is that the mechanical removal of egg masses is actually very, very easy to do, and really easy to actually implement in the landscape. The next one being biological control. Biological control is more so handled by things like the federal government or slow the spread programs. We are able to, through federal funding and federal programs, implement biological control for things like emerald ash borer, hemlock woolly adelgid. Larger control programs are able to actually deploy some of these biological controls for us, which is fantastic. And then finally, chemical control, which is what we're going to talk about in just 1 second. It's important to note that you take all of these other steps of integrated pest management before getting to this chemical control step, really. And what that's going to do is allow your products that you're applying to be most effective whenever you're applying them. All right, so general plant and landscape health. This is step 1 of integrated pest management. You hear it a lot, you hear it all the time, but again, it's worth saying again, right tree, right place. We want to make sure that we're irrigating properly, okay, not overwatering or underwatering. We want to make sure that we're implementing proper pruning practices in some of these plants, mulching as well. We want to see mulch donuts, not mulch volcanoes. We want to be applying prescription fertilizer where we're able to and where we should. And then finally, things like root enhancement and compaction reduction. Again, these are just 6 of the very few things that we can do, or a few of the many things that we can do or have available to us in our toolbox to increase the vigor and overall health of the plants in our landscape. And by doing this, hopefully be able to deter or really reduce the overall impact of some of these invasive insects. Now, I talked about mechanical removal. Mechanical removal of spongy moth egg masses, again, is very, very easy to do, okay? You see somebody here, they have a sort of burlap sack that's been folded in half and then wrapped around the tree. And what that does is it actually stops the adult females that are crawling up the tree and holds them actually within that burlap. Sometimes they will also lay their eggs within that burlap. And you can go along, and what this woman is doing here is she has a container of soapy water and a plastic fork, and you can just flip those egg masses or those adults right into that soapy water and euthanize them like that. You can also go around with a plastic fork or even a popsicle stick and just scrape at some of these egg masses whenever you see them and just remove them like that. I told you guys how many eggs can be laid in one of these egg masses, and so every egg mass can count, especially during outbreak populations. BTK is a bacteria that is commonly used and sprayed for control of pests like this. Now, BTK, or Bacillus thuringiensis, is a natural occurring bacteria in the landscape and really in the natural world. And BTK is, again, usually applied, it's usually the product that's applied via aerial spray for some of these control programs. BTK actually triggers the release of a protein that damages the digestive system of the insect. And what happens is the insect then stops feeding and then dies from there. Before hopping into some of our different management options in terms of chemical control or chemical applications, I want to go over the four main application methods just so that we're all on the same page. The first one being a foliar spray. As the name suggests, this is when we're applying something to the foliage of a plant in order to knock down that population. This is really great to be used with contact insecticides, things that have to actually touch the insect or the plant in order to damage the insect. And usually things that are applied via foliar spray do not move systemically within the plant. So if you spray half of a tree, you're probably not going to get the best control on the other half of the tree. The next one being bark spray. Bark spray, as the name suggests, is when you take the product, you mix it according to label instructions, and you apply that product to the base of the tree, really 6 feet down to just above the soil line. And this allows the product to actually move through the pores of the bark into that vascular system and then be transported up into the foliage of the tree. Now, this is done with products that can move systemically. Again, you're providing perfect coverage of the base of that tree, and then it can actually move and get complete coverage of the tree. The third one being tree injection. So tree injection allows us to inject products directly into the tree itself, into the trunk of the tree. So we take a drill a hole, and actually put that product directly into the vascular system of the tree. That allows that product to, again, move systemically and get complete coverage and protection of that plant. And then finally, soil application. Soil application is usually done in one of two ways, one being injection, which is what you see here, and then the other one being soil drench, which is usually just mixed in a bucket and then applied just around the base of the tree. Hopping into management options. Now, it's important to note that these are management options that we have suggested and recommended off of industry standards as well as our own internal data. So the first one being a product called Lepitect. The active ingredient is acephate. This is a 97.4% active ingredient. This product is typically applied via soil injection. So again, it's usually done through something like the HTI, which is one of our pieces of equipment. Now, the dose can vary. We recommend a dose of 0.2 ounces per inch for trees that are less than 15 dBH, or 0.4 ounces per inch for trees that are over 15 dBH. For timing, this one is really important to, again, understand the pest and what we're trying to treat. Timing should be done at least 1 week before anticipated hatch. So this goes back to the integrated pest management. Being able to identify the pest that we are dealing with and then also identify when it is active is really important and really vital to the success of this treatment. And then with retreatment, we typically recommend 30 to 45 days as needed, especially in areas with higher populations or outbreak populations where we're seeing a lot of mortality. It's important to mention that Lepitect soil applications can become less predictable with trees that are greater than 25 inches in dBH. The next product that you can use to treat a pest like this is a tree injection or trunk injection of mectinite. Now, this is the active ingredient amymectin benzoate. This is a 4% active ingredient. Now, dosing on this is going to vary. It's important that you refer to the label with dosing of mectinite because it's going to vary based on tree size. Now, the timing on this one is important as well, although less important to get narrowed down as the Lepitect. With mectinite, we want to apply this product prior to the hatch of the larvae, ideally. And we can also do this application in the fall to actually get control throughout the following season, which is a great option as well. We want to make sure that we're retreating annually with mectinite. The next product that is a great option is Lepitect Infusible. Now, this is applied via tree injection. With this one, again, you want to make sure that you're reading and following the label, as with all products. But refer to the label for this one because, again, the dosing is going to vary based on tree size. And the timing of this, you want to apply this just prior to the hatch of the larvae or during early leaf emergence. So just as those buds are starting to swell and emerge. And again, we want to do an annual retreatment of this product. And then finally, one product that is actually new to our line is Diamid TNO. This is applied via foliar spray. The dose can vary 1 to 4 fluid ounces per 100 gallons of solution for this product. We want to make sure that we're beginning sprays around 90 growing degree days and retreat every 30 days as needed. So again, it's important to monitor your conditions and monitor growing degree days based on where you are. This, unfortunately, is not yet registered in California, as well as a few other states. But if you're in other areas of the country, this might be a good option for you. Just wrapping up here in the last 5 minutes, it's really important when we're talking about really all pests, all invasive, native or non-native, that we're paying attention to things like don't move firewood. A lot of these pests are able to move around via lumber, import and export, nursery stock, the firewood that you get before you go hiking this weekend. All of these pests can be living in or on any of these things that you're moving around with you. So it's important that we kind of keep an eye on things, monitor things, and then also follow any quarantine rules. Again, that www.slowthespread.org is a great option and a great resource for you to see if you're in an active quarantine zone and if you need to be a little bit more careful about where you're moving things. Finally, pay attention to all of these great programs like Burn It Where You Buy It, Don't Move Firewood. These are all there for a reason. And can actually make a significant impact in slowing the spread and really the impact of these invasive insects. All right, summary before we finish up. Spongy moth, previously called gypsy moth, Lymantria dispar, is a highly destructive non-native defoliator that feeds on hundreds of tree and shrub species. It was originally introduced to the Northeast US and has spread widely and caused millions of acres of defoliation annually. California faces recurring introductions via humid-assisted transport, like vehicles, firewood, and even outdoor equipment. Urban forests and native hardwood ecosystems are at high risk if establishment occurs. Control strategies, including monitoring, biological control, targeted insecticides, and public education, can really help out with pests in populations like this. And then finally, early detection and rapid response are critical to prevent permanent establishment in California. And before we wrap up, for those of you who are in the San Jose, California area, we have a in-person live event coming up, invasive shot hole borer workshop. With this workshop, you'll learn key factors to understand invasive shot hole borer. You'll go to the source where the initial infestation was identified in Northern California. You will have an opportunity to see trees in various stages of insect infestation. And then finally, you'll be able to see multiple management tools and get some hands-on experience to improve both tree health and direct management of invasive shot hole borer. So scan that QR code and register if you're in the area and you're able to attend. And with that, I thank you so much for your time today. I am just going to pop back to the previous slide so that you guys have an opportunity to capture that QR code if you're interested. And I'm going to hop on over to the Q&A right now and see if we have any additional questions. I see a few folks just typed in their ISA credits. I appreciate that. Alrighty, no questions at that time. Well, I thank you all very much for joining me today. I hope you learned something about spongy moth. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love talking about this stuff. I'd be happy to connect you with the people in your area that might be able to assist you further. But again, thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate it. Have a great day.